Welcome to Financial Progress. Today we have a special guest, Walli Miller from Financially Thriving. Walli is a financial coach, a first gen millionaire, and early retiree who is now work optional. I'm
Hey.
so excited. Welcome, Walli.
Welcome,
Thank you.
Molly.
Thank you for that lovely intro. And thank you so much for having me. I'm excited about having this conversation.
Yeah, so are we. So I feel like we can't skip over first gen millionaire. Like, that's just amazing. Can you share a little bit about your financial progress over the years and how you achieved that?
Yeah, I wish I could say that, like I always had my money act together and I had figured it out. But that was definitely not the case. I, sort of did the traditional route. Education was important, or sort of, I saw that as my ticket out of poverty and low income. I was born and raised in New York City and raised in the Bronx, right? So a lot of what I saw about money wasn't directly taught to me, right? My parents didn't like sit down and talk to me about a checking account and savings and budgeting. A lot of what I learned about money were the things that I sort of observed and sort of absorbed from being around my family and my community. And so I was always interested in money, but I never really thought that being wealthy, or definitely not being a millionaire, was ever part of my, was going to be in my future. So for me, the key to sort of making it and having a quote unquote good life was going to be education, because that was going to lead to a good job. And a good job meant that you were going to have like your bills paid. So that was sort of my really my like upbringing with money. And I was very future focused. So when I was in middle school, I was thinking about high school. When I was in high school, I was thinking about college. And that's kind of where it went. Once I, finished, when I graduated from not high school, when I graduated from college, I decided to take a break before going into any graduate programs. And that was sort of where my trajectory and my financial story, I would say, started, because I started making money at that point and I wasn't very good at at keeping it.
Can you tell us a little bit about like your financial story and how it started?
Yeah, as I mentioned, I knew that education was going to be really important to me. One of the things that I did was I had gone to college down in Florida and I wanted to come back to the city. But I had gotten a job in my career field down in Florida. And so when I was moving back to New York, it was like a $5,000 raise. But really, it was like a 50% pay cut in lifestyle, right? My apartment in Florida was like $400 a month. And so when I came back to New York and I was making, I don't know, maybe $30,000, I couldn't afford that. So I had to move in with my dad, and that really helped me a lot, for sure. But it also felt a little bit disempowering, right? Because I went from like being independent and having a little bit of money to like live on my own, and then wanting to be back in the city. I just couldn't do that. But one of the things that it did do was that I thought about the job opportunities and the job sort of opportunities that I would have in a bigger city versus sort of like a smaller town, smaller city down in Florida. So I was really strategic. People had sort of said, like, you're basically going to be taking a pay cut moving to New York. But I thought big picture, right? It wasn't about what was like right in front of me, was what doors it could open. And that's really what happened. So I went from making 28,000 dollars down in Florida to like making 30,000 in New York. But what it did do was introduce me, and I was able to meet people and network, and sort of double my salary, or actually more than double my salary in less than 2 years. And that was really helpful. Now, that also required a move, because that job opportunity that was going to afford me sort of the doubling of the salary was not in New York. It was all the way across the country in California. But people who live on the East Coast want to experience West Coast life, and people on the West Coast want to experience East Coast life. And so I moved to the West Coast. I moved to Northern California, and I, negotiated my salary and went from making about $35,000 a year at that time to making about 75,000. And that
That's
was
a
when
big
I felt,
difference.
oh yeah, that was when
Yes.
I felt
Yeah.
like I had made it, right? Because even though California wasn't as expensive, or at least Northern California wasn't as expensive as New York City was, it was still not $400 a month, right? Like it was still sort of an increase in lifestyle expenses and living expenses. But because the increase in pay was so big, like it was like fine, right? I could afford an apartment on my own. And one of the things that you said, Jess, was like that was a huge increase. It was. And I didn't know what to do. Like no one ever, I knew that paying the bills was going to be important, and I knew that saving some money was important. So I paid my bills. I thankfully didn't really get into credit card debt. I did have some student loans, and I had a car note, but everything, bills paid off, check, right? So in my mind, I was doing good with money. Putting money aside for savings, check. But I didn't know how much I was supposed to be putting aside. So I felt good at putting away like $25 to $50 per paycheck in a savings account. But like I went from making 30 to 35,000 to 75,000, and I kept my savings rate the same. And what did I do with the rest? It was just spend, spend, spend. And that's kind of what I did. But again, in my mind, I thought I was doing good. I was like, I'm paying my bills, I'm paying off my loans, I'm putting money aside for savings, like I'm doing well. And it wasn't until a few years later where I realized you might be missing something.
And what was that like aha moment? Like what or who, because sometimes it could be a person, like was like, okay, we need to change things. This is it.
Yeah, I had a career that I really loved, right? So, and I really had an ideal job situation. The work that I was doing, like I didn't understand when people would say like they had the Sunday blues, right? Like for me, it was like, wow, like I am really lucky. I'm really blessed to like be in a situation where I'm getting paid really good money. The work was challenging, but it was also really fulfilling until that changed, right? And a boss that I really loved, a supervisor that I really loved, left the office. He went to take another position, and the atmosphere and sort of the environment of my ideal work situation started to change. And it went from, I still loved the work that I was doing, but then there was a lot of red tape, a lot of bureaucracy, a lot of rules that started being implemented that made doing the work really hard, and really made the work environment quite toxic. And it was at that moment that I realized, man, I just want to like say, screw you, I'm out of here. And I realized that I couldn't do that. Like if I missed the paycheck, definitely if I missed two paychecks, I was going to lose everything that I had. I wasn't going to be able to afford my life. I wasn't going to be able to afford my student loan payment, my car payment, my rent payment. And it was that feeling of being stuck that really opened my eyes to, I am not doing this right. There has to be more, right? And it took me that long to sort of realize, because again, in my mind, I was doing good. I was like paying off my bills. I was putting money aside in savings. But it wasn't until I felt like, wow, if I missed the paycheck, if something happened, I wasn't going to be okay. And that feeling of feeling stuck in not having any options really felt disempowering. It didn't feel safe to me, having that consistent paycheck felt very safe. But I realized that it was sort of an illusion, it was a facade.
Yeah. And I could relate to a lot of that because it was at a point where I was just making all the minimum payments on my credit cards. I was like, I'm doing fine. I'm just making minimum. That's enough. And then it's just like, no, it wasn't cutting it. Um, where, where or who did you go to like to learn about what was going to be next for you?
So it was almost like I don't know. It was like a sign, right? I ended up seeing a clickbaity headline article that said, couple in their 40 retires to travel the world. Now, one of the things that I really enjoyed about my job was that I did get to travel a lot. And so I did it for work, but I also really enjoy traveling for pleasure. So that article headline sort of really
Mhm.
intrigued me. So I had read that article at the time. I remember sending it to my boyfriend, fiance, and I was like, oh, this is kind of interesting. And then I put the article away. Well, during this time where sort of shifts were happening in my workplace environment, I dug around to try to find that article. And I remembered that I had emailed it to my fiance. And so I like through my sent emails, and I reread that article, and I reread it and tried to understand like how were they able to do that, right? It wasn't that they were both like six-figure earners working in the tech sector. Like my job was my career was in public service. So I was like, how are they doing this? And at that time I was making decent money. And so I'm like, how are they doing this? And that led me sort of into the world of Google and like to try to like Google more about their information. And they happen to have a blog. And that led me down a whole rabbit hole. So what's really interesting at that is that this happened when I went and back to find that article. It happened on a Friday. And I spent that entire weekend sort of like down this rabbit hole of like figuring out what are people doing? What is a savings rate? What is building wealth? Hold on, what is this whole thing about investing? Isn't that gambling? And I really went down this rabbit hole and started listening to podcasts. And I mean, I spent hours like, I think I probably brushed my teeth and took a shower that weekend, but like it was like I was like intense. This was like woke up, papers, calculators, pens, spreadsheets out, really trying to understand what happened. And by this point, me and my fiance, who I had sent that article like a year prior, we were married. And Sunday comes around, and I'm like, I think we can retire early. And I was like, I think we can do this by the time I'm 45. And he's like, okay. And so I explained to him everything, and he was sort of on board. And what I realized was that saving money was good. But if you didn't have a goal, if you didn't know what you were saving for, it was almost like frivolous. And that was sort of what was happening to me, because I was saving money, but I didn't know what I was saving for. I was just like, oh, I know you're supposed to put some money away, right? But how much and what are you saving for, right? It never really like occurred to me like, oh, you could put like a month's worth of living expenses in a savings account. To me, it was savings to spend for my vacation, right? Or it was savings to spend on, a nice bag that I wanted, or to go on a shopping trip, or, something like that. And, in some ways, yes, savings is meant to be spent. But if you're sort of doing it without a goal of what you're saving for, it can really slip out of your fingers, right? It can just like leave your bank account. And so that was like the first thing, like realizing that I needed to set goals and figure out what in the world I was saving for. The next component that I really had no idea about was this whole building wealth. When I thought about building wealth, I thought about like an old man in a velvet robe smoking a cigar. Like I had no connection to that word wealth.
Mhm.
And these blogs and podcasts and these articles that I was reading was talking about building wealth. And I had to figure out what a wealthy life meant to me, right? It wasn't, first class flights. It wasn't flying in a private jet. It wasn't even staying at 5-star hotels. Now, don't get me wrong. Like I do enjoy traveling. And, if you're going to give me a first class seat, I'm not going to turn it down. But when I realized, I was like, I just want to explore the world. I don't mind staying at a 3 or 4-star hotel. I don't mind going in economy or business class, if I can't go to first class, right? So it was just like, okay, let me figure out like what wealth meant to me. And it meant feeling secure. It meant feeling that I had options, that I didn't have to stay at a toxic work environment where I wasn't being appreciated, where there was a red tape for the sake of red tape, right? Where it was making it difficult to do my job. And those were the things that made me feel wealthy. It made me feel wealthy to be able to take my nieces and nephews to Disney World for the first time. It made me feel wealthy to be able to have my nieces come and spend the summer with me, to give their parents, so they didn't have to worry about, summer camps and things like that, but I could be able to do that, right? And I could afford that. And as I began writing about like what my wealthy life looked like, and I defined it for myself, I realized I didn't connect with the word wealth because I was saying that wealth meant you were an athlete or an actor or an artist who had millions and billions of dollars, right? Me, a wealthy life looked like being able to spend time with the people that I love, doing the things that doing the things that I cared about, doing the things that mattered to me. And that was sort of like my awakening, right? And I realized that saving money was great, but if I wanted to have a wealthy life, I was missing this component called investing. And I was missing that whole piece of like having my money work for me, right? Because I was already working hard to earn that money, and then it would stop there. And it was like, wait a minute, there's a thing out there that's called compounding interest that will let your money continue to work even when you're not working. And that was sort of like that aha moment that I had. It was really a combination of like hearing other people's stories. And this is why I'm so happy that you're allowing me to share my story, because it's like, wow, someone else could do this, right? Someone who grew up in the Bronx could be wealthy. Someone who never, had no idea how to invest, whose parents didn't invest, who equated investing to gambling, could learn simple strategies to use very simple concepts and simple resources and tools in order to build wealth. This is what we need to be talking about, right? This is the conversation that we need to be having.
Yeah, and I just want to thank you for being willing to share your story, because that's what sparked your interest, right? With someone else sharing their story, and just the power and impact that it can have on other people is just amazing. I just want to go back to the financial goals that you mentioned. Were there any specific goals you focused on first, or how did you prioritize and stick to your goals?
Yeah, so I'm a natural spender. And one of the things that I sort of got a vibe was that people really focus on reducing expenses. And in my mind, I was like, no, I can't reduce my expenses. I have expenses. There's no way for me to reduce my expenses. But I did think about, okay, could I add some additional money to my debt? Could I pay extra payments to my student loans and to my car payment? It had never occurred to me that I could do that, right? It's kind of like what you were mentioning, Jess. It was like, oh, the minimum payment. You just pay the minimum. That's the amount that they say, and then you just pay it. So it never really occurred to me that I could actually pay more. And I remember writing down a list of all of like my necessary expenses. So keeping a roof over my head, keeping the lights on, keeping food on the table. And then when I thought about some of the things that weren't necessarily needs, but they were like really strong wants, things that I wasn't willing to cut out. So like getting my eyebrows done, right?
Yeah.
Getting my nails done. And then when I subtracted that number from the amount of income that was coming in, supposedly I had all of the, money left over. And I was like, why that this is not like the math ain't math in here, because it's saying that I'm supposed to have extra money left over, but that in reality is not what's happening. And then I just decided to just become a little bit more aware. And there was something that people talked about, and it was called a no spend challenge. And now a no spend challenge could be structured in different ways, but basically you say, okay, for this week, I'm not going to spend any money except on the things that are on this list. And then you could define what's on that list. So you could say, okay, my rent is due, my credit card payment is due, my car note is due, and I'm going to go out, for lunch on Saturday, right? So like you could define whatever that is. And so I try to do a no spend challenge. And I tried this several times. Every single day that I tried it, I kept violating my rules. And I was never successful at completing a no spend challenge, right? I tried to do it for a week and then I was like, oh, okay, I'm going to start new today. Oh, I'm going to start new tomorrow, and that just kept happening. And it wasn't that I was spending money on, like buying TVs and electronics and things like that. It was something as simple as going to Target for toilet paper and laundry detergent and leaving with candles and a candy bar and pillows, right? And it might sound silly, but it was those wallet leaks that was really holding me back from being able to make extra payments on my debt, or really was holding me back from adding more money into my savings account and adding more money to some of those financial goals. And so the first thing that happened for me was becoming aware. Once I became aware, I focused on paying off the debt, because I was like, okay, if I didn't have this $300 payment or this $500 payment anymore, then I would use that to fund my savings and my investing. And so that's not always mathematically the most optimized way of doing it, but that was kind of what made sense in my head. Was, let me get rid of this car payment, let me get rid of these student loans. And I was already far enough into those journeys, because I didn't learn about this in my 20s. I was in my 30s already. So I had student loans still in my 30s. So my journey was almost about over anyway. And so I focused on paying off my car note and focused on paying off my student loans. And I was able to do that after about a year. And when I did that and I freed up those payments that I was sending out to these, to these institutions, the student loan debt, I had to pay. At that time, it was Sally Mae, and pay off my car. Now I had extra money. And now I was like, okay, I have this awareness that I'm having some wallet leaks. Let me really figure out how to intentionally spend, right? Because I was sort of like a mindless shopper. I was quite impulsive when it came to shopping, but I was also spending mindlessly. And once I had that money left over when I paid off those debts, then I really could make progress to saving money, right? And my first goal was like, just save one month of rent, right? Like, just save enough to cover your rent, so that maybe you can't eat, you might need to go to the soup kitchen, but at least you could keep a roof over your head, right? And then it was like, okay, well, I want to save for 1 month of rent, and I want to save for that vacation that I want to take. And so it was like making those like small incremental steps that really helped me. And when I began to do that, then I could think a little bit bigger, right? Then I could go from, okay, 1 month of living expenses and a month's vacation to, ooh, what would happen if I just try to buy my retirement, right? Instead of working until 65, could I put myself in a position to maybe retire at 63? What about if I could buy my freedom and fund my own retirement and retire at 60 and then 58? And that was sort of where that trajectory went, right? But I realized that saving wasn't going to help me do that. That what I needed to do was include and incorporate the investing piece.
There's so much to unpack with everything you said, so I appreciate all the information. The next part, I want to be able to get into you and joining the journey of financial independence, but I would like for you to share that moment that you told your husband, like, we can do this, to the moment that you became that millionaire. How long did it take?
So it was probably the end of 2015, because we had already been married. And then in 2016, we had paid off that debt. So we didn't really start investing and saving aggressively until 2016, because as I mentioned, we really focused on paying off the remaining of my student loan debt and paying off the car note. So between 2016, we reached millionaire status in 2021. And then the stock market took a tank in 2022. And then we got it back towards the end of 2022 and at the end of 2023 and reached our official financial independence number. And when you think about what does financial independence mean, it just means that you have enough of investments, you have enough of an nest egg that you can pull from your nest egg and it'll cover all of your expenses, right? That you won't need to work. You can collect the passive income, you can collect the growth. And we hit that number in 2023. And it was at that time where I decided I had become financially independent. I had become work optional. So working was an option. And I decided to exercise that option and walked away from my 19-year career in public service, and decided to focus more on building my financial coaching practice. Now, many people might say, okay, well, what about your husband? Because isn't he working? So my husband continues to work, but he will be joining me in financial independence, because we've reached our number as a household. This wasn't an individual number. We've reached our number as a household. But because I wanted some safety in like starting the business and the flexibility, I wanted to just see what life being work optional, what that would look like. So he will be joining me in work optional status at the end of this year.
Wow, that's so amazing.
Congratulations.
Yes, congratulations. That's so amazing. Wow.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
I remember, I think when we were at FinCon, you mentioned that you were going to leave, but you wasn't sure about leaving. And then, so when did you officially do that?
So I put in my notice in June. I spoke with my supervisor at the end of June of 2023. And then I gave my notice. I had sort of told her informally, and she asked me to hold off to see if we could. And I held off for a little bit. And at the beginning of July, I officially turned in my notice. What ended up happening was my last day officially was supposed to be August 31st of 2023. But then, I ended up staying a little bit longer. And so I said, okay, well, I'm going to go on vacation in September. I already have like a month's long worth of travel from September to October. And they said, that's fine. No problem. Just stay on board. And I said, okay, it's great. Then I extended it till the end of October, and then I extended it to November. And then finally, what I said in mid-November was that I wanted to spend both Christmas and Thanksgiving with my family, because I continue to live in New York City. The majority of my family now lives, or at least my immediate family, they live in Florida. And so I said, okay, the Friday before Thanksgiving break, that will be my last day in the office. And that was my last day in the office, was that Friday. Now, they then offered me the opportunity to work completely from remotely. So I stayed on until the end of the year. And it was one of those things where I feel like mentally it was a really long goodbye, but it was also what I needed, I think. I think it made the transition from working, and collecting a paycheck, since I was really young, right? My first job was when I was like 14 years old, working summer youth employment in New York City. And so it really helped me sort of make that transition. So by the time that it was official, my final day was in the office, or my final day as an employee, I was like mentally ready and prepared. So, and it was also different that I didn't hate my coworkers, right? So I had talked about sort of like this toxic work environment when I was living in California. Because we were on the road to financial independence, one of the things that it did for me, even though I wasn't financially independent, but in 2016, 2017, it gave me options, right? Like learning how to gain confidence with my money, managing my money, getting organized with my money, and creating financial goals and a plan began to give me options. Now I felt fine that if I didn't have a paycheck or two, that I would be okay. And so I was able to leave that job in California, come back to New York, and have a really great work environment, right? And even with that, that even though I loved the work that I was doing and I had a better work environment, I still pursued financial independence because I could see what it could afford me. And that was one of the things that was really crystal clear in June when my supervisor, my boss, had asked if I would just hold off on turning in my notice, which I did. And then when I had turned in, I said, okay, my last day is going to be in August. I could have said, yeah, my last day is in August. I'm out of here. But I was willing to stay because I knew that I had an exit strategy. And coming from that place where you know that you have options is a really powerful place, right? That you don't have to stay in a toxic living situation, work environment, anything like that out of pure necessity. And it gave me that freedom to do that. And so when I finally did exercise, like, okay, no, like really, right? It took 6 months to say goodbye. I really felt good, right? It wasn't so traumatic and it wasn't like dramatic either. Like, it was like, no, it was like a slow goodbye. Like towards the end, people were like, you're still here kind of thing. But it felt really good and it felt really powerful. And it came from a place of, I don't have to do this, but I want to do this. And that's why I also embrace that term work optional, because some people will say, well, you have a business, so you're still like working, but I have the option not to work the same way that I have the option to work. And now I am just working, helping other people reach their financial goals, which makes my heart happy.
I do love that term. I told Jess, I was like, we have to put that in her intro because that term, I just love work optional. I don't think I ever heard it before. And while reading your bio, I was just like, oh, wow, we really need to put that.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's also, so there's this sort of this community, right? When I talked about that couple on that journey of, retired by the time they were 40s in order to travel the world. One of the things that I knew didn't 100% resonate with me wasn't that I was like retiring not to do anything. I was going to retire, quote unquote, retire in order to have more freedom of my time. Yes, some of that would be traveling, but it was also like, I need to find like what it is that I want to do. And so I wrote down a list of things that I wanted to do. And some of those things were like self-development, personal development, things like, hey, I grew up in the Bronx. I don't know how to swim. So I want to learn how to swim, right? I want to learn how to, I want to learn how to sew. I want to be able to slow travel, right? Instead of like trying to see a city, a town, a country in a week or two, being able to say, you know what, like, let's just like get an Airbnb for 2 months and like live somewhere new and sort of explore the world and at a slower pace, right? And not feel like we're rushed, right? Not feel that feeling of like, I need a vacation from my vacation. And so I knew it wasn't that I wanted to, and I don't think most people want to just not work, right? But they do want the option of working on the things that they're passionate about and working on their own terms, right? Being able to say, you know what, I only want to work between these hours on this day and these hours on another day, right? Being able to say, you know what, I can take more a lower paying job, for example, or a lower paying gig and work at the nonprofit that I really care about because I am financially secure. And so that, so the whole movement is called FIRE, financially independent, retiring early. But I sort of like rejig that for me. For me, it's financially independence, and I'm simply refocusing energy, right? So I've replaced the RE of retired early to just refocusing my energy. Will I be a financial coach in 20 years? I don't know. I'll probably always talk about money because I think it's such a powerful tool that affords us so many different options. But I might be doing something else, right? Maybe I'll finally learn how to swim and then like teach other people how to swim. Like, I don't know. But I want to be able to have more control over my time and more freedom with how I spend my time.
No, I love that. Refocus energy.
Love
That's
it.
perfect. What is the single most important piece of financial wisdom that you would like to leave with our audience?
I think that large steps, big leaps in finances could really, really make a difference, right? But people underestimate the small steps that you can take, right? I didn't go from paying sort of the minimum or the standard payment on my car note and student loans to like doubling that. I went by putting an extra $25 to my minimum payments, right? And the same thing could be said about investing. When we think about investing, we think perhaps maybe real estate. Oh, I need to get a property. Great, that's awesome. Real estate is a really powerful wealth builder. The problem is that you need a few $1,000s, right, in order to buy a property. But when you begin investing in the stock market, for example, you could start with like $25. And people don't like to hear this, but it should be quite boring and like simple. And you can start off simply by using your 401k at your job, right? If right now you're contributing already, what would happen if you increase that contribution simply by 1%? So if you're contributing 3%, what would it look like to contribute 1%? Right? What would it look like to, if you're contributing 5%, to go up to 7%? And I think just try it out. You can always go back if you want to, right? But just make that small step of deciding to make one small decision, either some extra payments towards debt, or make one small decision, one small increase to contributing a little bit more from your paychecks into a wealth building vehicle, like investing in your workplace retirement account, or maybe an IRA if you don't have a workplace retirement account.
That is perfect advice. Chrissy, do you have anything else for Walli?
I'm just so inspired by your story. It's an amazing journey. And were there any like setbacks that occurred that like kind of knocked you down, and you were like, how do I get through this?
We had setbacks really because it was really pretty simple, right? It was really get laser focused on where you were having these money leaks, right? And for me, it was these like shopping trips and these like putting things in my Amazon cart, or scrolling through my phone and just like, oh, I need that gadget, or I need this gizmo, right? Or I need this outfit. And really thinking, okay, one of the things that I did was a 48-hour rule. Some people have a 24-hour rule, but because I was so impulsive, it was a 48-hour rule. So I had no problems in putting things in my shopping cart. And to this day, if you go to my Amazon shopping cart, like I have so much on the like, save for later. Like, in my save for later cart. Yeah. But what it helped me do was say, okay, I want it. I don't want to forget about it, right? Because I might forget about it. I'll put it in for later. And then 48 hours later, I would ask myself the question if I still wanted it in the same way. And a lot of times the answer was no, right? A lot of times it was like, let me just keep it on there because I still kind of like it, or I still want it, but I don't need to get it right now. And that really helped me, and sort of equating what I was buying to the amount of hours it was going to take for me to afford the thing. So for example, if I was going to buy a pair of boots, I would say, okay, this would require me to work 3 hours of work. Is it worth it? And sometimes the answer was yes. And sometimes the answer was like, oh, heck no, I'm not going to be working there an extra 3 hours. And sort of taking those 10 seconds to just really be aware with like, what was I thinking? How was I feeling? Did I truly want this? Did I really need this? Or could I put this in order to buy my freedom? And I just kept reminding myself, like, what you are doing is not waiting till somebody else says you have enough, but building that wealth plan and building that bucket on your own. And because of that, like today, I don't feel guilty about buying a Chanel bag. I don't feel guilty about buying a $4,000 sofa. I don't feel guilty about vacationing in the Maldives, right? Because I know that I have a plan to specifically take care of myself in the future while also enjoying what I really want to now. And so where there months that maybe we couldn't put as much as we wanted to in savings, sure, but I don't call it a setback because something was better than nothing, right? It was better than what I was doing in the years previous. And those things are going to happen, right? It's going to happen that way where, the car breaks down and the $500 you were going to put towards savings now has to go into a mechanic job, right? But it was also like, okay, this is a setback. It's okay. I don't have to put it on a credit card. I'm going to take care of it. And next month, I'll get back on the plan.
Thank you so much for coming on our podcast. Where can our audience find you?
Jess and Christy, thank you so much for having me. You can go to my website, which is financiallythriving.com. You can learn more about my one-on-one financial coaching program, and all my socials are there. I'm most active on Instagram, and you can find me at financially_thriving.
Amazing.
Thank you.
Well, thank you again, Walli, for your time. We really appreciate you and sharing your story. So
Thank
you can
you for
also
having me.
Thank you. You can also follow us on Instagram at Financial Progress Podcast.